Hi, I'm TJ Castning. I'm the owner and founder of Ambassador Group, and I'm here with Kim Leifson, who is an expert in PXT, to share with you how we've learned how to improve the hiring process with PXT and make better decisions for hiring authorities and candidates together that result in longer lasting, more durable relationships. Kim's been using PXT for 25 years. She's been tremendously valuable to me and my organization and our clients. And so this video is about helping you learn how you can use PXT to see around the corner, whether or not you're on the candidate side or on the client side. So we're gonna look at actually my company's PXT, the team report, and we're going to go through and anecdotally share what I've learned in this process, what Kim's learned, and try to give you a feel for how PXT works to give you more clarity on issues that are pretty hard to get at in the interview process. Kim, do you want to add any more to that?
No, nothing major, just small little things like this is not a personality assessment. It is what psychologists and psychometricians, who are the people who study the measurement of behavior, they call this a core trait tool or a true trait tool. So what does that mean in layman's terms? It means your comfort zones. If you could show up and just be you at your best, most natural self, what does that look like? Because if you have to get outside of who you are, if you have to stretch and get uncomfortable, which we all have to do, by the way, it adds stress and it depletes energy. And we all have differing abilities to stretch. Some people are those little teeny tiny braces rubber bands, and some people are the giant industrial rubber bands. So it's really understanding that this is a tool to be used by both sides to help them understand what it is that they need from the workplace if you're a candidate, or what it is you need from the candidate if you're an employer.
So we're going to dig into my team's PXT, and I got to tell you, I am completely intolerant to turnover that I'm not planning. And recruiting is not exactly known for being a low turnover industry. So this is the challenge that we've had in going into this, is who is really suited for this role, and how can I adjust each position to maximize where their makeup is, and what kind of conflict could I expect necessarily with our process or between members of the team, and how can we leverage the diversity that we're hiring into the team. So I'm going to share our team report here.
And TJ, let me explain really quickly that this graph that you're looking at, the 1 through 10, from the far left is 1, far right is 10. It is not, this is a normed bell curve. So it's normed to the entire working population. So the majority of people are going to fall between the 4 and the 7. The further you get on the outskirts of that bell curve, the more unique that trait becomes. So if someone is to score a 1 on assertiveness, that means they are less assertive than 97.5% of the population. If they score a 10 on assertive, they are more assertive than 97.5% of the population. And again, neither one of those is good or bad, right or wrong. It's dependent on what you're asking the person to accomplish. So I tell people all the time, we want candidates to own who they are, to be who they are, to put themselves in situations where they get to just be them, where they're not having to stretch and get outside those comfort zones on a frequent basis. There's never going to be a job that fits anyone 100% of the time. Every job is going to present some area where every candidate's going to have to stretch, and every candidate is going to present the employer some area that they're going to have to stretch in to help coach and develop them. So I just wanted to make sure that you understand that this graph there is no right or wrong scores. You can't fail at being you. So where every single one of these candidates, or these are TJ's employees, so where every single one of these employees falls is who they are and where they are. So what can TJ do to help manage and coach and develop those individuals, and put people in roles where or design roles around what those individuals' strengths are and what some of their weaknesses might be for that particular given position or his culture.
Yeah, it's also helped me recognize how different people are. I think when we started working together 5 years ago, my concept of who I was certainly much more narrow, and inherently my concept of who other people were was more narrow as well. And I think I would describe myself as one of those leaders who thinks that they need more of themselves in order to be successful. And one of the things that I've learned over the last 5 years of using PXT is that, if anything, the last thing we need is more of TJ, and what we need is a whole diversity of skill sets and perspective. And now I have a tool for recognizing that diversity, interviewing it, discussing it, leading it, and relying on the strengths that come with a skill set or a nature that is different than mine. And so we can dive into PACE here as one of the first behavioral traits that we look at. And you'll notice that we've got some team members who are more on the side of steady. And then we've got one here who's much more on the side of urgent. And I want to say there's much complexity to this, right? So what you're seeing here is a person on a point of the spectrum, but people manifest these things in different ways. They have different levels of humility or expectation that things conform to them. So I don't want you to think that this is a simple matter, but I can tell you that this is very true, and that I've learned that people on the urgent spectrum have a pathological need to go fast, and attention to detail is not always the first priority of theirs. They move quickly, they get things done, they can often multitask extremely well, but they may not be paying attention to all of the details, right? So with Gabriel here, it's been great to pair him up with somebody who is slower on pace and is paying attention to the details, but I know that I can rely on Gabriel to get things done very quickly. And designing the role for him, one of the other things I've learned is, be careful about designing the role that makes for certain risk factors if you go too fast. And I've noticed that Gabriel, the more demand for high attention to detail, it costs him emotionally, energetically, right, when he's not going at his preferred speed. Now, this isn't to say that I haven't seen improvements in his ability to stretch, to grow, but I would say I can definitely see a certain happiness in him when he's going quickly. And then in contrast, or maybe to complete the calibration, as a leader, I see where these people are at on the pace spectrum, and I would say this and all of these metrics or where people are scoring proves out to be pretty true. And it's also interesting to see how they might compare to each other. So maybe that's something we can talk about, Kim, as we get more into this, is how some of these traits will combine with one another and present other interesting strengths and weaknesses. Anything else you want to cover around pace? Observations about me or what have you?
Yeah, let me just talk really quickly about that. The traits compounding each other and mitigating each other, because they do. However, the tool itself does not correlate these traits. They are not correlated in any way, shape, or form statistically. However, my experience over 25 years of using this, absolutely, you'll see if someone is high on pace, but on the right-hand side of pace and low or on the left-hand side of decisiveness, that slows their pace down because they need more information. They need more data. But you're absolutely right, TJ, that there are nuances, right? We're human beings. There's no way we can put people into buckets and label. It makes it really difficult to label. And that's part of what I love about this tool is that it doesn't label. It doesn't put people into buckets. It allows for the nuance of humanness. And having Gabe on the far right-hand side shows you as a leader what sort of behaviors you're going to see, not what kind of person is going to show up. It's going to tell you what kind of behaviors you're going to see. And on the left-hand side, with the three furthest to the left, what kind of behaviors, the opposite behaviors you're going to see. Let me just explain pace a little bit, because it's not just about multitasking. It's really about your ability to juggle. How many things do you like to juggle at once? And when we're comfortable juggling a certain number, so for example, Gabe is really comfortable juggling 9 or 10 things at a time. So when he's juggling 9 or 10 things at a time, what that means is he can start to look around and he can start to have a conversation because he's comfortable and in his rhythm. But if you throw him 2 more, he's like, oh, wait, I got to focus and I have to pay attention, and it adds stress and it depletes energy. What people don't realize is taking 2 things away from somebody also depletes energy and adds stress because it's outside of their rhythm. That is what we're measuring here in PACE. It's that rhythm that people like to work at. So if we were to tell Gabe that he has to sit in a room and he's always going to do is this one task repeatedly over time for the next couple weeks, he's going to get overwhelmed because it's not enough for him. He's overwhelmed not from the standpoint of too much to do. He's overwhelmed by, I have to focus on this one thing and it's going to add stress. So understanding the need for that person, and you said it really well, TJ, when you said, when you start getting on the outskirts of that bell curve, they become needs. They become driving behaviors, right? When we're in the middle, it's like, I like to describe that bell curve as the top of the mountain. So when you're sitting at the top of the mountain, you can stretch and go both ways, and you can see both sides of the mountain. So you know when you need to go to the right, and you know when you need to go to the left. But when you're in the middle, like the majority of your team is, TJ, they know, okay, I need to ramp it up a little bit. And I can ramp it up for a certain amount of time. But if you make me ramp it up for weeks upon months upon years, I mean, we're talking right now about burnout is such a huge deal in employers and for candidates and employees. This is what's happening. We're pushing people beyond their pace, and so they're burning out. So we have to allow people to go back to where they score to recharge those batteries. So that's what we're measuring. That's PACE in a nutshell.
So when I'm interviewing candidates and we're looking at PACE scores, an example of how I might think about PACE is if I got somebody who does score high on PACE in the urgent category, I'm going to be asking them questions about how aware they are of that, how well they can modulate it, where their sweet spot is, and I'm going to be thinking about designing that role to not rely on them to have some incredible level of attention to detail. And we see this sometimes with our clients where, hey, we want somebody who can handle 20 projects and have consummate attention to detail. And the reality is that person does not exist. And this spectrum helps us recognize that you can have a mix of both, or you can have extremes of both. And you really need to think about your role in terms of, what's realistic about human nature and how much we can really expect from a person reasonably. Right. Emotional intelligence can expand the stretchiness of the rubber band to meet the situation as it dictates. And one other factor is, how you combine people into positions can either predict how they complement each other or perhaps how they conflict. So without self-awareness, if I paired, say, Gabriel and Jake, thankfully they're really good at this, but if they weren't aware of this and they're trying to work together, and Gabriel's wondering, hey, why aren't you going faster? And Jake's wondering, hey, why aren't you paying more attention to all the little details? Then there's opportunity for conflict there. Because we can have a conversation with that beforehand, whether in the interviewing process or as we're building the team and setting expectations, we have a chance to turn that diversity from conflict into teamwork and partnership.
Absolutely. That's the beauty of the spectrum, right? The beauty of the spectrum is we have diversity, and diversity on both sides is beneficial as long as we talk about it and we're educated about it. And we know what the other side of that spectrum is bringing to the table, because it is something positive. And we also have to be self-aware about what our side of the spectrum has that's negative, because there are pluses and minuses to both sides. So understanding that and that self-awareness and that discussion is super important to the success, the long-term success of the relationship.
Cool. Let's keep moving on to assertiveness. This is kind of a fun one because I happen to be the most assertive person in my company. Real quick, I'll share how this has grown me as a person, and then I'd love, Kim, for you to share your observations of my growth in this category. When I initially saw this, this really checked out because I know myself to be forceful, but seeing it on this graph really drove home that this is a massive strength and a massive potential weakness if it's not managed properly, as anything out on the ends of the spectrum tends to be. And that was, I have a need to express myself, a need to be heard, a need to communicate. And that served me well in recruiting, but man, I've really damaged some relationships, not managing that well, not being self-aware about that, and recognizing where situations have needed for me to shut up more and listen more. And so I've been grateful for how this assessment has helped me see a bit of how unique I am in that area, and to be able to dial it up and dial it back. And my personal goal has been for me to show up on whatever point of the spectrum is necessary for the situation, but also recognizing that that's going to cost me some energy. And the more I can be skilled at sharing or being heard in an effective manner, that's going to make that trait show up more as a strength than it might otherwise if it's not being curated. So Kim, you want to share when you met me, I wasn't aware of this, kind of what you observed and how you've seen that develop?
Yeah, I remember one of the first times I met you, TJ, is when we fed back this data to you and your team. And I remember explaining, because what happens on this far right-hand side of the scale, and we're talking about TJ's score on assertiveness. You can see he's the TK on the far right under forceful. He's actually more forceful, more needs to speak up. Assertiveness is really measuring the need to be heard. So what that means, it's not an aggressive assertive at all. It's I need people to understand what's going on in my head. I need to share that. It's important that they know what I'm thinking. That's really what assertiveness is measuring. And so when I met TJ, I wasn't really sure yet how this was showing up. But I can tell you that after I explained what can happen to a leader in an organization, who on the far right-hand side, what happens is when you're the CEO or the owner or the general manager or a leader in an organization, and you're on the far right-hand side and you walk in a room, naturally, people stop talking, because you are the leader and they're waiting to hear what you have to say. It's just a natural human response. When a leader falls this far to the right on assertiveness, what happens is they walk in the room and they start talking because they need to be heard. And I've got things to say and things to share, and my ideas need to be, pushed out to the organization. And so what happens is there's very little room for the people on the left-hand side or even center to be heard, to hear what they're thinking, to hear what their ideas are, to hear what they're feeling. And so a leader on this far to the right really needs to ask specific questions. If you walk up to, there's 3 people over there on the far left. If you walk up to those individuals and you say, "How's it going?" Those individuals are going to say, "Great." Because that's great. I don't need to share anymore. All the details don't matter to you. It's just great. But if the leader on the far right says, "Hey, tell me what's going on with that project. What's stressing you out? What are you excited about? What's lacking? What resources do you need?" Then they start to open up a little bit more, because now you've asked very specific questions. So TJ, what I've seen you where I've seen you grow is you ask more dynamic questions now. You really reach out to your team. You've started doing cultural assessments. You've started trying to understand what is going on in their brains. And that's how I've seen you evolve over a period of time. But in the beginning, I wasn't really sure how that showed up. But you are a very emotionally intelligent leader who knows, okay, I need a different outcome. I need to to hear what my people are thinking and feeling. And so you do that intentionally. But that's the key, right? The key is when you know where you fall, you can know what you need to do intentionally to get a different result. If you don't know where you fall on the spectrum, you don't know what you have to do different. You don't know where you have to get uncomfortable. And so that's why it's important from a candidate perspective to understand, okay, if I fall on the far right-hand side of assertiveness, I need to make sure that I'm asking good questions in an interview. I need to make sure that I'm digging with a leader to understand what their leadership style is like, because I don't want to walk in and just do all the talking. So that's what I've seen and what I continue to see with you and Ambassador TJ.
In a lot of ways, this has just taught me to shut up. And I say that, with kind of self-effacing humor, but it's so true. I mean, it helped me realize like a tendency to talk is a weakness when you need other people to talk and you need to understand. And so it's driven me towards a journey of curiosity and asking better questions and cultivating more of a conversation that's often led or dictated by other people. When we're looking at the other side of the spectrum with unassuming people, what do you think about, well, on this spectrum, what do you think about when you're interviewing? And once again, you're thinking about the team they're going to fit into, the leader they're going to work with, the type of work that they're going to do. How would interviewing one side of the spectrum change from interviewing the other side?
Yeah, great question. You're probably, if you're interviewing someone on the far right, you're probably not going to have to ask a lot of questions. They're going to tell you exactly what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what their ideas are, and probably what they had for breakfast in the morning, because they really have a need to tell you. Like, remember we were talking about that need versus just a preference, right? When you're as far to the right as you are, it becomes a need. Like, I need to communicate. I need to share everything. Well, you do need to communicate, but you maybe don't need to share everything, right? Maybe there are things that are confidential that we shouldn't share. Maybe we need to be as transparent as possible for this situation, but there is some information that we don't need to share yet because it might cause chaos. It might cause fear. It might, whatever. On the left-hand side of the scale, you're going to have to do some digging. You're going to have to ask lots of follow-up questions. They're going to give you the shortest answer possible, not because they're withholding information, not because they don't have good ideas or they can't remember. It's likely because they just didn't think they needed to share that maybe you didn't want that much detail. And so when they are on that far right-hand side, you're going to want to dig a lot more, ask lots of follow-up questions, etc. And it's not that they're withholding on purpose. They're really not. It's just I didn't know you needed or wanted to know that. It's a genuine response or lack of response.
Okay, let's move on to sociability here. This is an interesting one. I've used PXT with Kim for, a little over 5 years now, and I honestly don't fully understand this one because for some reason my team, as you'll notice, bar one has really clumped to the center, and that's not been a factor that we have intentionally, consciously measured for. It's possible that we've done this unconsciously. And so it's very interesting. We're all very central, except for one. And so, Kim,
That's
how do
me.
you look at that? And what do you think?
I'll be honest, that's me. And, I think this is a really good example of emotional intelligence and the ability to stretch, right? I am a one. Fully admit that. I need to be alone to get energy. I think there is some misconceptions and myths about introversion and extroversion, because that's really what we're measuring here. It does not mean I like people, I don't like people. That's not what it means. What it means is, where do I get my energy? 8s, 9s, and 10s get their energy from being around people. 1s, 2s, and 3s get their energy from being alone. I absolutely get my energy from being alone. It's where I like to process and recharge. But that doesn't mean that I can't be social, right? It doesn't mean that I can't relate to people. It doesn't mean that I dislike people. I like people very much. It simply means that I need to go be by myself to recharge my batteries. So if you're asking me to be the salesperson who's going to go out and has to work a room and network and small talk and build relationships. It's not going to happen. Does that mean that people who score ones and twos can't be salespeople? No. For a long time, I've owned my own business and I've had to do that, and I've done it fairly well, but it's not something that I want to do. It's something that I know I have to do. So with my emotional intelligence, I'm able to stretch and get outside of that comfort zone in order to achieve what it is I need to achieve.
When you say emotional intelligence, Kim, can we define what you mean by that?
Yeah, emotional intelligence really is that rubber band that we were talking about. It's that need to understand. So emotional intelligence is being self-aware of who you are and your emotions in the moment. It's your comfort zones, right? I'm really comfortable here. I'm not comfortable here. Understanding that is your emotional intelligence. And then how you operate within that feeling or that emotion to get a specific result. So if I know that my comfort zone is getting in the way of me achieving what I need to achieve, if I can get outside of that comfort zone to achieve the goal or the result, then I have high emotional intelligence. If I can't get outside of that comfort zone to achieve what I need to achieve, I'm stuck in this emotion, I'm stuck in this comfort zone, I don't want to feel those feelings, that is low emotional intelligence. And so does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I'll add, in leading this team, seeing people navigate the team with differing behavioral traits and themselves needing to show up kind of in different ways depending on the situation has been a really interesting I guess, layer of information when you're considering what emotional intelligence is, because the more emotionally intelligent we are, I've observed, the more quickly we recognize that somebody else is just different and we can accept them, we can collaborate with them, we can work with them, maybe even build something special with them. Whereas people with lower emotional intelligence, less self awareness, expect everyone to be like them. And of course, nobody is like you. And so there's just so much more, even subtle conflict, less teamwork, less collaboration, more friction. And what we look for when we're hiring for Ambassador Group is, not just for somebody, I would say more important than having someone at a certain point on one of these, spectrums of behavioral traits, is their ability to recognize that everybody else is different and I've got to fit with other people. And sometimes that means being a little bit different than my fully natural self would dictate. And that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. If you have low emotional intelligence, then what happens is you look at individuals and think, well, they are maybe attacking me, or they are not, how could they possibly be that way or think that way, right? Because it's not the way I think. And so what happens is just exactly what you said, TJ, that conflict, that level of conflict, the potential for conflict increases significantly, instead of looking at someone who's different than you or thinks different than you and thinking, wow, what can I learn from that? Or what do they bring to the table that I don't see or have or think about? And that increases collaboration, it increases learning, it increases innovation, it increases teamwork, a whole bunch of things. So it is a very highly sought after and necessary skill, because emotional intelligence is a skill. It can be learned, that employers are finding is much more important than almost anything else. It's more important than behaviors, like what the PXT is reporting on. It's more important than IQ or intelligence. It's more important than experience, because you can give someone the experience and the skills. Mm-hmm. You can teach someone emotional intelligence as well, but how they react in a given situation is really, really, really important for lots of relationships and success.
I think of it like, I almost think that the term emotional intelligence is a little bit of a misnomer, because we think of intelligence as some sort of baked in thing like IQ, but like you said, it's a skill. And I think of it like relational navigation skill. So certain people, given a map, can navigate to a destination, and you have to be able to read the map, right? And the emotions are this invisible map, that we all need to be paying attention to navigate with various people. And some people, you'll look at them and they're just capable of so much because they know how to make relationships work and to get more out of people and teams and create abundance for themselves and for others. And then other people just seem to be in conflict with everyone, always stumbling into conflict. And at the end of the day, it just comes down to, can you see the map, or are we choosing the toughest terrain to go through to try to get to our destination?
And I think that's the intelligence piece, right? It's, are you smart about emotions? Are you smart about comfort zones? And how you handle that is the level of it that you have. But it's being smart about relationship and emotions and feelings. And a lot of people just don't want to address emotions. And they think that the workplace has no place for emotion. But it absolutely exists in work and in the workplace and with your work relationships. And if we're not talking about it, then we're missing a big piece of what's going to create success or failure on teams and in organizations.
Yeah. Okay, let's keep moving to conformity.
Conformity is the need for rules, structure, and process. So the far right-hand side brings compliance and consistency and quality. On the far left-hand side, we have the ability to look at things and problem solve and not need the structure there to make those things happen. So it's really about ambiguity and being able to question, what is that rule and why does that rule exist and does that rule make sense? Which there's a place for that, right? And then there's also a place for, we need rules and structure and process. So that's what we're measuring with conformity.
So if I had a role that was, let's say, an accounting role, and it's going to be interacting with the IRS, would it be wise for me to look for somebody who's particularly strong-willed or compliant?
That's a good question, right? It depends on what the outcomes are of the role. So we really need to talk about, what are you trying to achieve in that position? Not what the duty and responsibility is, right? But what are you trying to achieve? And then we need to determine, is that something where we want them to be compliant, or we need them to challenge the IRS and really have deep conversations and find loopholes and find, all of those places where we can get around the rules and the structure, right? So it really depends on the role.
I think once again, this stresses how, people's behavior is on a spectrum, and it's extremely rare to find somebody who can work the entire spectrum. And so often I see hiring authorities who expect both sides, right? They want somebody who's strong-willed when they need to be strong-willed, and they're super compliant when they need to be super compliant. And there are people whose rubber band can stretch the whole way when they need to. It's going to cost them a lot. But the vast majority of people out there interviewing for jobs or running companies are really need to stay relatively close to their natural behavioral trait. And so thinking about role design and hiring very carefully, asking questions around these features is super, super important for the interviewing process. I hope you're seeing that as we're discussing this, we are getting the opportunity to look around the corner and assess how their behavior may show up in the role, and then ask very detailed behavioral questions about how they've handled situations in the past, how they problem solve, what their preferences are. We can validate this information. We can set expectations with them, because we want maximal informed commitment from the candidate, and we want to eliminate surprises for you and for the candidate, right? That's going to lead to long-term success. So this assessment is providing a context that you can interview at a much higher level of resolution and much deeper than your traditional interview. Let's get into Outlook. And maybe on this one, this would be fun to talk about how sometimes these combine in particularly challenging ways, in good ways, and in bad ways, and how to think about that.
Yeah. So Outlook is measuring 8s, 9s, and 10s. The glass is always half full. I trust everyone and everything. 1s, 2s, and 3s. The glass is always half empty. I don't trust anyone or anything. You have to prove it to me. So you have, TJ, here a team who, it's interesting to me how you've been able, both in sociability and in Outlook, to attract and hire people who are so similar. And what that talks about is your culture. These are important to your culture, so you are attracting and you are selecting, whether you know it or not, intentionally, you're attracting those kinds of people. So how does Outlook interact with other traits? Outlook is, again, about being trusting, and so it can sometimes rub up against decisiveness, right? Which we haven't really talked about. It's the next one. Decisiveness is the need for, it's about a propensity for risk in our decision making. So on the right-hand side of decisiveness, we are looking at people who go, sweet, skydiving, and they get on the plane and they jump. And then they go, oh, shoot, I should have checked the parachute first. 1s, 2s, and 3s go, sweet, skydiving, and they check the parachute so many times that you miss the plane. So we get paralysis. It's a potential for paralysis by analysis, right? So if you look at the combination of the scores for Outlook and the scores for decisiveness, we have people who are central but leaning on the side of, I'm going to be a little bit skeptical and I'm going to ask lots of questions, with decisiveness scores that say, I need more information before I'm going to believe what is told to me, right? So those two, you can see how they combine. Although they're not correlated statistically, it's very common to see how these traits work together and sometimes mitigate each other, right? If you had someone on the far left of decisiveness, but the far right of pace, can really help push them more central in the decisiveness side, and you're going to see behaviors more central than what their natural inclination is, because they're in a hurry to get stuff done. So oftentimes these do work together or mitigate each other.
We have this saying in the business called optimistic skepticism, or skeptical optimism. And that's an important trait in recruiting because on one hand, you need to have optimism about everybody you meet. You can't afford to be rudely skeptical, but you also need to not take everything at face value. You need to assess and cross-reference. And so I can make sense of this Outlook score on the team, that everybody's fairly central and can go either direction. But I'll also note that, experientially as the leader, I definitely explain a lot more to the people on the left side than the right side. And if I'm hiring, I don't know if I've hired anybody on either extreme necessarily, but one of the things I'd be thinking about a lot if I'm hiring somebody who's very trusting is that I need to be particularly careful to look out for that person because they're going to trust me. And that is going to come with extra responsibility for me to make sure that this works for them, that everything makes sense. Because if you're a leader who expects people to push back when something doesn't make sense or they have a different perspective and you've got somebody very high and trusting, they're not going to say anything, right? And you could see also how, with assertiveness, let's say they're also unassuming and they're trusting, right? That person's not going to say anything and they might let you make a mistake. Versus somebody who's very skeptical, you're going to need to explain a lot more to them. Their pushback and their feedback may be really helpful for clarifying concepts and, helping you not make mistakes. But likewise, really paying attention to alignment with skeptical people is important. And I've noticed that, if you've got a skeptical person who is high in forcefulness, and we haven't talked about this one, but if they're also bold, then those can be situations where you can expect to need to navigate change with a lot of clarity, with good justifications. And if you're making decisions based on your gut that you have a hard time articulating, which I have at some points, then you can expect more pushback. And, what if that person is also fairly strong-willed, right? You can see how you need to have your ducks in a row as a leader before you go through some process of change with that individual.
Absolutely.
Decisiveness.
So this is that propensity for risk in decision making. So on the far right, these are the people who make very quick, bold decisions without necessarily thinking about potential consequences. On the far left, these are very risk averse people. They're definitely not your gamblers. Definitely not the people who are going to just take the first level of information that they get. They're going to dig. They're going to find out. They're going to try and find all the potential options and all the potential consequences. The further to the left they get, the more detail they need. So you do have a team, TJ, on the far left. Well, that's not true. They're mostly central, right? And those 6 right there in the 4 and 5 range. And then you do have 3 pushing the envelope towards needing more detail. But that detail brings, as you said, it brings plan Bs and plan Cs, right? In case this doesn't work, have you thought about? That's what's so great about that side. So it's not uncommon to see leaders of organizations, entrepreneurs, on the far right-hand side of decisiveness because they have to keep things moving, right? They have to keep moving forward. But those individuals need to surround themselves with people on the left-hand side who will check their parachute for them so they're not jumping off bridges and without a parachute. And they're helping you to see what those potential consequences are.
This is an interesting one. You're making me realize I'd like to get some more bold people on the team and bring more of that diversity to the team because I think there could be some benefits there.
Well, and that's a really good thing to think about, TJ. I appreciate you bringing that up because once you start to see these spectrums for what they are, an actual spectrum, you start to notice the positives to the other side. And what is it that my team is lacking, right? What are we lacking and what do we need to bring into the organization? I'll give you a really good example of this. I was working with a client who everybody on the team scored below a 3 on sociability, which worked for them because they were a small software development firm, right? And that's great. There's no conflict. They're all sitting behind a desk coding all day long. They don't need to be social until the organization wanted to grow. And the owner said, I don't have anybody who wants to talk to my customers. And so when he thought about, okay, by design, I want to bring people in who are on the opposite side. So we have some of that in our organization because both sides are good. They both bring positive things. He had to think very carefully about what is that going to do to the culture and how is that bringing that person in on the other side of the scale going to interact with the people on the left side of the scale or on the other side of the scale, and making sure we're setting those expectations and being very clear and communicating about what those relationships are going to look like now, because otherwise that person on the far right hand side of sociability is going to think, nobody in this organization likes me. Nobody wants to talk to me. They don't care about me. They don't ask about me. They don't want to get to know me. And the people on the far left-hand side are going, that person never stops talking. They need to go away so I can get my work done. And so there's this becomes conflict because we don't understand. We're not self-aware of where those feelings are coming from. And we haven't set the expectation for what does the other side bring to the table that we need. So it's that dialogue that is so important. So thanks for bringing that up because that's a really important part of thinking about the needs of the organization long term.
Indeed. We'll jump to this once we finish these assessment points, but we're going to talk about how to think about this on the candidate side, because one of the unique things that Ambassador does is bilateral assessment. So we assess the leader, the hiring authority, the direct manager for the candidate and the candidate, right? So that they can see their results, how they're similar, how they're different. And I love the level of clarity that we're able to give candidates about how they're going to relate to the leadership at the firm. And Kim, your interpretation with these candidates has been absolutely invaluable. So let's not forget to do that.
Yeah.
Shall we jump to accommodation?
Yeah. Accommodation is the need to please others. So 8s, 9s, and 10s, if you tell them to jump off a bridge, they're going to jump because it's all about making you happy, despite what it might do to themselves or anybody else around them. 1s, 2s, and 3s are more focused on the goal. So if the goal is to get across the finish line first, they'll shove grandma out of the way to get across the finish line first because we're making this happen. Get on board or get out. I don't care how it makes you feel. So you have a very central team. There's no extremes there. But you do have some people pushing the the preferential behaviors on both sides of this.
Tim, how do you think about the relationship between, say, agreeable here, trusting, strong-willed, or compliant, right? Like maybe it's not the same thing, but maybe it rhymes a little bit. Or what would you say you notice in doing thousands of these are the similarities or differences? And what would it look like for somebody to be high in agreeableness, for example, and skeptical?
Yeah. So it's so interesting, TJ. I have seen thousands of these over the years, and I can honestly say I've never seen the same pattern twice. Like there's the combinations, the possible combinations of the PXT is something like 40 million. Like there's so many different possible combinations of this that they never show up the exact same way. But there are some traits that complement each other and those that mitigate each other. And for sure, when you have someone who's a high accommodator, they have the need to make other people happy. It's a need at that. When you get to the 9s and 10s, right? It becomes a need. It's a driving behavior. They will do at all costs. They will make you happy. And when you have someone who's on the left-hand side of decisiveness, right? They need more data. So what happens is if they're in a role where they've got to get you some information really quickly and they've got a need for having more data and doing a lot of research, then there's a juxtaposition there, right? They are stressed now because you're asking them to make a quick decision and they want to make you happy. And so those two things are directly opposed to each other. So that's when we get stress. That's when we get being overwhelmed. You have that going on for long periods of time, that's when we're getting the burnout and the stress. And frankly, when someone's having to stretch and get outside of who they are at their best, most natural selves for long periods of time, that's when we start to see physical manifestations. You'll actually get sick. You'll have heart attacks. You'll have mental breakdowns. The mental health crisis in this country is astronomical right now. And that's because we've never looked at it like this. We've never looked at where are we asking people to go against their natural behaviors, the best of who they are. And we've just plugged them into jobs and said, deal with it. And so now we're seeing people that are just like, I can't do this anymore. Combined with a whole bunch of other things going on in society and in the world and economics, right? You had all that other pressure. And it's just a lot right now. And so you make a really good point. When these traits run up against each other, it wreaks havoc. It really wreaks havoc. And we don't necessarily know it. And if you have someone on the left-hand side of assertiveness, they're not going to tell you. They're not going to tell you at all. They're just going to leave. And you're going to wonder why. Did that answer your question?
It does. It brings up another great point, which is how valuable this information has been after the hire. Because, we're talking about it a little bit with a focus on the interview process, getting that conversation going, kind of knowing the kind of person that you're hiring, how to structure the role, what the personality, behavioral trait dynamics might be. But I'll also note that later on in building these teams and leading people, when there's been conflict, which there always is, right? Like there's no way to get out of having conflict on some level. Maybe it's not people, actively disliking one another, but maybe they're just not working super well together. Maybe they're not communicating super well. Maybe they're not getting really great results. Whatever that conflict is, going back to these results and contemplating, and maybe calibrating is the right word, calibrating my understanding of who this person is, how they're showing up, how these traits are manifesting themselves, where they're at on this spectrum, where the other people involved in that are also on these behavior spectrums, has been super valuable. And there's also some other reports that PXT will provide around coaching the person, leadership reports. You can pull a team report like this so people can see where they rank next to each other, and just so helpful for relational navigation, with challenging people. Because you give us the right scenario, the right situation, we're all challenging in some sense, right? The real question is, are we able to recognize who we are, who other people are, what their goals are, and how do we work together to get the best result for everybody. So use it after the hire is my point.
Thank you for defining leadership, right? Leadership is all about, it's no longer about getting the job done. It's about getting the job done through your people. And that is what we have to do, is design workplaces. In fact, I think you and I were talking about that quote yesterday. It's designing workplaces where people get to be who they are. Not that you're not going to have conflict, right? But understanding this allows you to see why that conflict is happening and to get ahead of it sometimes, or to mitigate it when it does occur. And remember that there's positive conflict, right? Conflict means that we're learning, that we're growing, that we're stretching, that we're outside of our norm. And sometimes that's okay. The key is, are we allowing those individuals to go back to who they are to recharge those batteries, and not asking them to change, but asking them to flex for a given situation and a given moment. That's a different conversation. So yes, the leadership is all of that, TJ. And I think when we start recognizing that is the leader's role, we can truly all be workforce strategists, right? It's about strategizing around where to put people and how to put people together and how to manage them to help them become the best version of themselves that they can be. Because when they can be the best version of themselves, then they're going to perform better. They're going to have more success, which means you have more success. This is what this data allows you to do. It's really structuring how you're going to respond to people, how they're going to respond to each other, and create an environment where they can all be successful.
I'm getting excited.
It's fun stuff.
Let's talk about
hard stuff, right?
Oh man,
it's
so
hard stuff.
There's so many layers.
And where I run into with clients, where I run into challenges when it's too hard. It's too hard. I don't want to do it. I just want to give them a paycheck, and I want them to come to work, and I want them to do the work and go home. There are a few jobs like that.
What's wrong with that, Kim? Why not? If we've got somebody who maybe recognize they think like that, what are they missing out on? How can they improve their life with a different perspective?
It depends, right? It depends on the person. It depends on the job. There are some jobs where that's absolutely possible. You can go to work, do your job, and go home. When you think about retail roles, right? Like that's a job where you can't take that home with you. There's nothing you can do at home if you're being a customer service person at a bank, right? That is a role where you get to go to work, do your job, go home, and then be you, like do whatever you want to do. That might be a role where people can stretch for 8 hours and then go home and be done. That's okay. But there are lots of roles where that's not possible, where you have to collaborate with people, where you have to problem solve with clients and customers, where you have to be a leader, right? When you're being a leader, you aren't going home and forgetting about your team. Every day you are thinking about, what does that person need? How can I best serve that person on my team? And so in those situations, if you are motivated by relationship, if you are motivated by problem solving, if you are motivated by collaboration, by strategizing, by thinking, those kinds of roles, then you really do need a team of people. And how we interact will determine whether or not that team is successful or that organization is successful. So it doesn't mean that everybody has to be the person who gets energy from that kind of work. There are some people that don't. They don't want that kind of work. They want work where they can do the job and go home. They don't want to think about how to best relate to the person sitting next to them, or how to motivate and encourage and engage a team of people. My father-in-law was that way. He was a machinist, and he went to work every day to build things, to create things with his hands. And then they tried to move him into a supervisory team lead role, and he lasted a week. And he was like, I don't want to do that. Like, this is outside of the way my brain works and the way that I'm wired to interact with people. I don't want to do that. And he went, nope, I'm going back to what I do best and what I love. And so he did. And he was great, and it worked, and he did that job for 50 plus years until he retired. And he was very successful and happy. So don't try to put yourself in roles where you have to be that strategic thinker, where you have to be someone who's thinking about work all day long, every day. You don't have to do that. But the key is understanding that about yourself, right? And as candidates, we were talking about why this is important to candidates. This is why. It's helping you see that because you're an introvert doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It means go find something that allows you to be that introvert. Unless, because I do know salespeople, really great salespeople who are introverts, because they want a specific goal. They want to sell that product. They believe in that product. They believe in what they're doing every day. And so they're getting outside of that comfort zone every day to sell that product. That's a different conversation. Yeah. Then I'm doing that because I'm aware of who I am and what I want to achieve. And so I'm going to do that intentionally, not because someone's making me do it, or because I feel bad about myself, or because, whatever the case may be, do it intentionally. That's a different scenario.
A lot of the firms that Ambassador Group serves are in the construction industry, all of them. And one thing I noticed is you need a lot of care in teams and in people to get a project to come together well over a long period of time where you're going to have a lot of problems. You don't necessarily want people to take the work home with them if you can build a system and process that doesn't require them to, but you want them to care enough to see the problems coming, make the adjustments so that your project can be successful. And one thing I know that I think unlocks a lot of discretionary effort is when people feel particularly well seen, heard, and appreciated, when their strengths are maximized and their weaknesses for the role, their strengths for the role and the weaknesses for the role are properly leveraged, properly managed, then they feel like they can do really good work, and they tend to get more satisfaction and fulfillment from that work, which is not something that many companies can provide. And so if you can provide that, if you think about a spectrum, and on this side of the spectrum, you have, let's say, a toxic culture company. And on this side of the spectrum is a high quality, high retention, high leadership quotient firm that has a strong employment brand and people want to work at. The degree to which you can be closer to the pinnacle of good business, and this business has an opportunity of being a self-managing business, is the degree to which you can design each role for each person to the greatest degree of efficiency for who that person is, to maximally respect the unique humanity and the nobility of each person who joins your company. And so this is one of the reasons why we've implemented this assessment with clients through the hiring process and want candidates to get exposure to this as well, is because each one of us is incredibly special. But, just because you have the same title in a company does not mean you have the same behavioral traits. It doesn't mean you have the same needs. It doesn't mean you have the same strengths and weaknesses. And so we need to be thinking on a per person management level, leadership level, optimization level for ourselves and for others, so that we can get the most out of our companies, for our lives, right? Because all this time that we're spending at work needs to matter. I'll get off my soapbox.
Absolutely. Thank you. Amen. Yeah, absolutely.
We keep taking all these tangents here. This is fun, though. I hope the audience is hanging in there. Shall we talk about independence?
Yes, independence is very different than sociability. Sociability is about the people, right? The focus is on the people. Independence is about the work. So 8s, 9s, and 10s in independence want to do the work by themselves. 1s, 2s, and 3s want to do the work on a team. You can have, again, talking about how these traits play together and work together, you can have someone who's highly social, who's also highly independent. That means they like relationship, they like networking, they like making connections. But when it comes to doing the work, they just want to go do it. It is often that I see. And people who are highly independent often are also high on pace and high on thinking style, because they can do it quicker and faster than involving a bunch of people. in the process. That doesn't mean that always, right? That always someone who has high thinking style and high pace. I've also seen that they can be low on independence. It just means they're getting something different out of the independence. They're getting perspective. They're getting collaboration. They're getting, they see it as a learning opportunity to be around others and to work on a project together. So it's just different. But that's in a nutshell what independence is. It's really about, when I go to work on something, would I rather do it by myself or with a group of people? Does not mean you can't be a team player if you're on the far right hand side of independence. They absolutely can be. It's just that's not their go-to, right? Their go-to is to just go do it.
We've definitely seen that. One consideration I'll add from an interviewing standpoint is I think about how baked the role, the team, the process is, and if you're hiring somebody who's highly autonomous for a role that is very thoroughly baked, it's pretty much set in concrete, there might be conflict there. And likewise, if you hire somebody who is more reliant for a role that's extremely prototypical, experimental, new for the organization, that person's going to struggle with the lack of structure, and they're going to need direction. And so make sure that you're hiring, people who are just very comfortable being autonomous, figuring things out, for roles that would properly leverage that, and vice versa with roles that are pretty procedural. And and then, if you got somebody in the middle, they tend to be able to do a bit of both, but not to the degree that somebody on the poles of the spectrum are going to be able to. Last one, judgment.
Judgment. This one's fun. Judgment is about how we make our decisions, how we come to the conclusions that we come to. 1s, 2s, and 3s make their decisions based on gut and intuition only. 8s, 9s, and 10s make their decisions based on facts and data only. This is one that can cause a lot of conflict in an organization, because what happens is 8s, 9s, and 10s often don't think about the emotion and don't get that gut, right? That gut is really about emotion. And so they often don't get the gut to say, oh, somebody's upset, or, oh, somebody is feeling bad, or, oh, this isn't going well, right? They don't get that. They don't have that intuitive hunch. On the far left-hand side, you can have a lot of emotion with no reason for the emotion, right? There's no, I just don't feel right. I just don't feel like it's going well. Well, why? I don't know. They don't have the facts and data to back up why they feel some way. So the far left-hand side needs to get comfortable with looking for the data, looking for the facts. And the far left-hand side needs to get comfortable with understanding that emotions can be very positive and helpful, and intuition can be very positive and helpful, and especially in relationships. And so being aware of that and asking people, how is this making you feel? And what do you need in this moment? And allowing emotions to occur. Oftentimes I've run into people on the far right-hand side who get so flustered by emotion itself that they just can't handle it. And it's like, I'm out. Like, I want nothing to do with that sadness or extreme happiness, right? Like, so they're overreacting. They just don't like that emotion. And so they close themselves in. So it can be, again, positive and negative on both sides. It's just understanding when we need one and when we need the other.
I've also noticed in hiring is how people will bring problems to you changes, right? To your point about something doesn't feel right, but they may not have an argument, a logical argument or a factual argument for it. I'm higher in factual, so I'm looking for those data points. And if I hear a problem from someone, what I need to do as the leader is recognize that there is something real going on there, just because they don't have the data or the facts to share for why they feel that way. And part of my job is to help them find the facts and bring that together so that we have a full picture. And the other cool thing about intuitive decision makers is that they often have very good gut reads. And they can know things before a more factual decision maker knows it and knows why they believe it. So strength and weaknesses to each side.
Which is why it's fascinating, not fascinating, I understand why a lot of your recruiters are on that left-hand side, right? They can get a read on a candidate really quickly and a read on a client really quickly to know this is going to work or this is not going to work. But the key to that is fleshing that out and helping them understand why, so they can explain it to the candidate or they can explain it to the client, and help everybody be happy.
So we got to the bottom of these 9 categories. 2 questions for you, Kim. 1, is this a yes or no hiring tool?
No, absolutely not. There is no tool. There is no, because we're humans. That's the answer. We're humans. We're too complicated. There's too much going on. And remember that this only is capturing behavior, who we are at our core, right? It's not capturing anything clinical. So if you have mental health issues, which a lot of our people do, it's not capturing any of that. So how these things interact and work together and play together is going to be dependent on a lot of different factors. So there is no tool on the market that is capable of telling you whether or not you should hire someone.
Any assessment is a 2-dimensional slice of a 3-dimensional person. So you can use a lot of assessments and a lot of times get different perspective data points on someone that you cross-reference. But at the end of the day, they're just tools in a tool belt for building relationships. The person who really makes the difference is the person who wields the tools most effectively. So that's the leader who can look at all these data points, make quality decisions, respect people maximally through that process, and build teams that outperform other teams. The second question I got here for you, Kim, is what are those teal lines? You know, there's those teal lines. Maybe we should do another video to explore what the teal lines are, how to use them, and what the limits of their use are, what the edge of their use is.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a pattern. It's okay, here's where all these people fall in that pattern we were just looking at. Really what it's doing is that one really wasn't doing anything because it was a generic pattern that I had to pull together to get the report with everybody's initials on it. So I was manipulating the reports just a little bit. Ultimately, what we want to do is to be able to look at inside an organization and say, what is currently working? What is the secret recipe of success? What's the secret sauce, right? And we can understand that secret sauce by assessing the team, by assessing top performers. If we assess the team, then we get culture, right? It's a definition of culture. If we are assessing top performers in a given role, now we can say, here's what the secret recipe of success is for that particular organization, that particular role inside that particular organization, working for that particular hiring manager. So it becomes a target zone of success. Now, does that mean that someone who falls outside of that target zone of success can't be successful? No, it means that they've learned to stretch or they've learned to grow. It also means that there are specific traits where everybody's going to score really closely together. Your pattern was a really good example of that, right? You have like 2 areas where everybody on your team scores the same. What that means is that's critical for the success of your organization, right? That's critical for your culture. Again, doesn't mean someone can't be successful going outside of that, but be aware of it. Know what you're going to do to manage it. Let that person have some conversation and some thought processes around what does that mean for them? Because they're going to have to do some stretching to fit into that culture. And so it's a conversation starter. And it allows you to have conversations that there's no other way to get this information without using the assessment. You can do as many interviews as you want. You can have them write a resume. You can have them do sample work. You can even have them come for a week and work in your organization and see how they perform. But there's always a honeymoon stage, right? I'm going to get outside of who I am to be what I need to be for this specific moment in this specific time. And that's why after 2 to 3 years, the person starts to settle into who they are. They settle into your organization and behaviors start to emerge that you're like, where did that come from?
Didn't show up in the interview.
It doesn't show up in the interview. Why didn't see that coming? Why is this happening? because the real them is finally starting to emerge. They're feeling comfortable. They've got their kind of their bearings around them now of what goes on in this organization, what's safe, what isn't safe, who's safe, who isn't safe, what the tolerance levels are, where the bumpers, they're learning all that stuff. And so now they can finally just be them. And so this tool and other tools, in fact, there was a Harvard Business Review study that said if you just do an interview, you have a 14% chance of making a successful hire, because you can't get all the information in an interview. There's no way to know where with this particular candidate do I need to probe. You're not going to know.
Hiring sometimes feels like rolling the dice.
It absolutely does, because you don't know what are the questions I should ask. What are the questions I need to ask for this particular person? And then the more data you add to the process, skills testing, emotional intelligence testing, reference checking, background checks, drug testing, right? The more stuff you add, the more data you add to the process, the more successful your interviewing and hiring becomes. So yeah, you just need more information.
So if you're a candidate and you've watched this and you found it helpful, I'm very, very happy about that. We're here to help you develop your self-awareness, to help your ability to succeed in an organization. Hiring authorities, we're here to help you make good decisions about people and plan well. And, for the leaders who are deciding, to grow their organizations with a firm like ours, Ambassador Group, this is how you can get a strategic competitive advantage in developing durable relationships. So we recognize that without these tools, hiring really feels pretty sketchy. You get unpredictable results. And so we want you to get good results. Come talk to us, have an exploratory conversation with me. And let's talk a little bit about how our process can help you hire with confidence and precision. Thanks for spending the time with us, Kim.
Always a pleasure.